That night, the grandest ball of the season was held at Whitmore Mansion. From the outside, it looked magnificent, but Viola Pemberton did not want to be there. She truly did not want to be there. Since morning, there had been something heavy sitting in her stomach, but her mother had prepared her, had fixed her hair, had helped her into her gloves, had watched her leave with that familiar look of worry. "You must be seen, Viola," she had said. "If you disappear, people will talk even more." So she went. She stood at the edge of the ballroom. She was not dancing. No one had invited her anyway. From time to time, she smiled at the conversations around her. From time to time, she nodded. At the far end of the room, someone else was standing as well. James Crestwood, Duke of Aldenmore, a glass in his hand, his back half turned toward the wall. He was not speaking to anyone. No one was trying to speak to him either. The expression on the Duke's face discouraged that from the start. 34 years old, unmarried, the holder of one of the oldest titles in England. For years, society mothers had been devising strategies to push their daughters in his direction. The result was always the same. The Duke was not interested. That night was no different. The rest of the ballroom barely existed for him, until something changed at the center of the room. The music did not stop, but everyone turned, as if an invisible wave had entered the room, and heads began to shift in that direction, one by one. The Duke lifted his eyes as well. Lady Harwick was walking, straight, determined, her steps quick. People moved aside for her without realizing it instinctively. Her destination was clear, and that destination was Viola Pemberton standing at the edge of the room in her pale blue dress. Lady Harwick stopped directly in front of her. The distance between the two women was a single step, perhaps less. Lady Harwick's hands were clenched at her sides. Her voice trembled, but it was a controlled tremor, the kind that comes from someone trying to contain their anger. And that voice cut through the entire room. "Would someone explain to me what business a woman has attending this ball after writing letters to another woman's husband?" The room froze. The orchestra played a few more notes, then it too fell silent. Viola stood still. She did not move. There was nothing on her face, no anger, no tears, no defense. Because she did not know what to say. More precisely, she did not know what this was. Letters? To her husband. Which letters? When? Her head was spinning, but her feet would not move. The people around her had stepped back without realizing it, instinctively. Viola was alone in the center now. All eyes were on her, and no one spoke. The Duke watched the scene from a distance. He had heard it, yes, he had heard it. He had registered it and moved on. These were society scenes. They happened every season. Someone cornered someone else, said something in front of everyone. The room whispered. By morning, it would be discussed at every breakfast table. It was not worth watching. He raised his glass to his lips. Then he saw Lady Harwick's face clearly, and stopped. The glass remained suspended in the air just before touching his lips. Eleanor. 5 years had passed. Her hairstyle had changed. The necklace at her throat had changed. The people around her had changed. But that face was the same. The Duke recognized her in an instant. Eleanor Harwick. While she had been married to her husband, she had written letters to him. Long letters, letters full of admiration, full of love. Even after her marriage to Lord Harwick, she had continued writing, as if that marriage did not exist, as if everything were perfectly normal. The Duke had never replied, not once. But the letters had kept coming, for months, until one day they stopped. And now that same woman stood in the center of the ballroom destroying another woman for writing letters to her husband. The Duke slowly set his glass down on the table, without haste, without a sound, but he no longer wished to hold it. As Viola left the ballroom, her head was held high. Her steps were measured, neither too fast nor too slow. There was still nothing on her face. Everyone inside the room was watching her, but no one made a sound. Viola walked through those stairs. She walked to the door. At the doorway, she paused for a moment and looked back into the room. Not at anyone in particular. She simply looked, for a second, perhaps less. There was no panic in that look, no tears, only something cold, withdrawn, as if to say, "I expected this." Then she turned and left. The Duke was looking at that door. He had not noticed when he turned, but he was looking. Outside, Viola's carriage was already moving. For a brief moment, the street lamp's light passed through the window, then it was gone, swallowed by the dark. Slowly, the Duke shifted his gaze to Eleanor Harwick. She was still standing in the center of the room. People were approaching her now, whispering in her ear, touching her shoulder. There was satisfaction on her face, the ease of someone who believed she had done her duty. The Duke watched her for a few seconds. Then he reached into his pocket and took out a small card, the blank side of the invitation. He picked up a pen from the nearby table and wrote a short note to his secretary for the next morning. "I want information on the Pemberton family. All of it." Let's step back for a moment. Because to fully understand what happened in that ballroom, why Viola froze, why she did not defend herself, why she simply turned and left, we need to understand how that world works. London, 1882. The ball season begins in May and ends in July. Within that narrow window, the city transforms. Country estates close, London houses open, and everyone returns, because the season is not to be missed. Why? Because the season is not entertainment, it is a marketplace. Every ball, every dinner, every walk in the park serves the same purpose. Daughters are to be married, families are to form connections, men are to build alliances. And the harshest rule of that world is this: reputation is everything. Money can come and go. Beauty fades. But once a woman's reputation is damaged, it is over. Society does not forgive. It does not forget. It simply waits. And when the moment comes, it shows no mercy. Viola Pemberton knew this very well, because she had grown up in that world. The Pemberton family was middle class, but respectable. Her father, Edward Pemberton, was a retired judge, quiet, honest, a man who had spent 30 years in court and had never wronged anyone. Even in retirement, people still sought his opinion. He was respected. Her brother, Frederick, 28, educated in law, intelligent, ambitious. He had not inherited his father's calm nature. He was more impatient, more driven. He wanted to build a major career in London, and he believed he deserved it. He had the talent, he worked hard. But in London, talent and effort were not enough. You needed connections. You needed money. And Frederick had no money. Viola was 23. She had been attending these seasons for 2 years, never causing trouble, never drawing attention. She arrived quietly and left quietly. She was intelligent, but did not show it too much. Beautiful, but not in a way that demanded notice. She was, simply, a proper young woman from a good family. Now let us introduce Lord Harwick. Arthur Harwick, 62, wealthy, one of society's oldest and most established names, the kind of man everyone respected, but no one liked. You know the type. He attends balls, shakes the right hands, says the right things, but when he leaves the room, no one misses him. He had money, he had a title, he had connections. His wife, Eleanor, Lady Harwick, was 5 years younger than him. She was beautiful, intelligent, and she sat at the center of London's most dangerous web of gossip. Which family was in debt, which girl's engagement had been broken, which lord had a drinking problem. She knew everything. And more importantly, she knew exactly when and how to use what she knew. No one wanted to be her enemy, because being Lady Harwick's enemy was very expensive. And the letter? It had surfaced 3 weeks earlier. Lady Harwick had found it in her husband's study. At least, that is what she claimed. It was signed Viola Pemberton, addressed to Lord Harwick. No one knew exactly what it said, but Lady Harwick's reaction after seeing it told enough. Within 3 weeks, all of London had heard. How did it spread so quickly? There is no need to ask. Lady Harwick existed. But there was one question no one had asked. No one in that ballroom had thought of it, because in society, the accused is not expected to prove innocence. On the contrary, the accuser is assumed to be right, especially if the accuser is Lady Harwick. Still, let us ask it. Did Viola really write that letter? When the Duke returned home that night, it was past 2 in the morning. He went into his study, lit the lamp, and sat down. He had no intention of sleeping. Something was turning in his mind, and it would not stop. Eleanor Harwick. At the very bottom of a drawer, there were letters. They had been there for years. He had not burned them. He had simply forgotten them. Until tonight. Now he remembered. The woman who had written them. The tone of those letters. They had been long, full of admiration, full of love. They had continued even after her marriage to Lord Harwick, as if that marriage did not exist, as if everything were perfectly normal. The Duke had never replied, not once, yet the letters had continued for months, until one day they stopped. And now that same woman was destroying another woman for writing letters to her husband. The Duke found it interesting. Not for himself. He had never cared what Eleanor Harwick felt about him. But the hypocrisy, the confidence, the sheer boldness of it. That made him pause. Then he thought of Viola. That 1 second at the door when she had turned back. Everyone in the room had been watching her, but in her gaze he had not seen what he expected. There had been no panic, no tears, no collapse. Only something cold, withdrawn, as if to say, I expected this, as if this world was exactly what it had always been, and she had already accepted it. But there had been something else in that look. Surprise. Small, almost invisible. It had passed quickly, but the Duke had seen it, and that surprise made him think. Because if Viola had truly written those letters, if she had done it knowingly, she would not have been surprised when the room froze. She would have felt shame, fear, collapse, but not surprise. That surprise had been real. The Duke rang the small bell on his desk. A servant entered, blinking as if just awakened. I want information on the Pemberton family, the Duke said. His voice was calm, unhurried. Everything that can be found. By tomorrow noon. The servant bowed and left. The Duke did not extinguish the lamp. He sat there until morning. The report arrived before noon the next day. The Duke paused several times as he read it, went back, read again. The Pemberton family was clean. Edward Pemberton, retired judge, spotless record. Viola Pemberton, 2 seasons, no rumors, no scandal. Clean, ordinary, respectable. But Frederick Pemberton was another story. 6 months earlier, Frederick had applied to Lord Harwick for a loan, a large sum, far too large for a young lawyer, and Harwick had refused, officially, clearly, on paper. But 2 months after that, all of Frederick's debts had been cleared. Quietly, off the record, without anyone noticing. And 1 month after that, the letter had appeared. The Duke placed these 3 points side by side. The loan request, the refusal. 2 months later, the mysterious clearing of debts. 1 month later, the letter. There was a connection. It did not require great intelligence to see that. But what exactly that connection was, that was still missing. Why had Harwick given the money? What had he received in return? And where did the letter fit into all of this? As long as those questions remained unanswered, the picture was incomplete. The Duke closed the report and walked to the window. Outside, the sky was gray. London continued as always. Carriages passing, people walking, life moving at its usual pace. He needed to find Viola. He needed to speak to her directly, in person. But Viola was no longer receiving invitations. Society had already cast her out. She had withdrawn into her home. No balls, no dinners, not even walks in the park anymore. The Pemberton family had quietly stepped away from London's social life. Understandable. But for the Duke, it was a problem. Because for the Duke of Crestwood to visit the Pemberton family, that too would be talked about, and that would harm Viola even more. He could not do that. The Duke thought for a while. Then he returned to his desk, took a sheet of paper, and began to write. The invitation appeared formal because it was written that way. The Duke of Crestwood was hosting a small dinner for selected guests. Scholars, old acquaintances, a few families. The list was long. The Pemberton family was somewhere in the middle, not noticeable. When Viola received the invitation, she stared at it for a long time. Her mother read it over her shoulder. "We cannot go," she said immediately. Her voice was firm, but low. "It would not be right to be seen right now." "It is an invitation from the Duke of Crestwood," Viola said. Her mother fell silent. Because they both knew, this invitation could not be refused. If they refused, that too would be talked about. They were already being talked about enough. So they went. The dinner was small, 12 people in total. The table was not large, but the seating had been arranged with care. Viola was placed near the center, the Duke at the head. There were a few guests between them. From the moment she picked up her first fork to the moment she set down her final knife, Viola did not look at the Duke. Not once. This was not accidental. She was careful. Deliberately, consciously careful. The Duke noticed. And it made him think. Because people caught in scandal usually did one of two things. Either they became very quiet, almost invisible, or they spoke too much, trying to prove themselves. Viola did neither. She spoke occasionally, brief, precise, intelligent remarks, but every word was measured, not too much, not too little. She was simply there, composed, calm, self-possessed. Was this a sign of innocence, or was it exceptional control? The Duke did not yet know. At the end of the evening, people began to rise. Coats were being taken at the entrance, small groups moving toward the door. The Duke passed by Viola. It looked like a coincidence. It was not. Viola stopped. She had no choice. The Duke glanced around. No one close enough to hear. Then, in a low voice, he asked a single question. "How well do you know Lord Harwick, Miss Pemberton?" Something passed across Viola's face, very quickly, almost invisible, like a crack that opened and closed. Then she looked at him, calm, controlled. "We are not acquainted, Your Grace." The Duke watched her for a second. Then he smiled. It was a small smile, almost unnoticeable. But Viola noticed, and she did not understand what it meant. That unsettled her. The Duke inclined his head slightly and moved on. On the carriage ride home that night, Viola stared out the window. The streets were empty. The lamps were lit. She thought about the Duke's question. What did he know? How much did he know? Or had he simply been curious, asking as one might ask about any piece of society gossip? There was no answer. And unanswered questions were the kind that disturbed Viola the most. Frederick came home a few days later. He had not sent word ahead. When he walked in, his face was wrong. Dark circles under his eyes. Viola understood immediately. One look was enough. Something had happened. She gently but firmly sent their mother out of the room, closed the door, sat across from him, waited. At first, Frederick did not want to speak. He stood, walked to the window, put his hands in his pockets, then took them out, paced the room, stopped, paced again. Then he sat and began. It had started 6 months earlier. Frederick was in debt. His law practice was new, clients were few, expenses high. He had made a few investments. They had not gone as planned. Quietly, without telling anyone, he was sinking. He decided to go to Lord Harwick, because Harwick lent money, not like a bank, more quietly, more quickly, with fewer questions. Everyone in legal circles knew this. He went, explained, named the sum. Harwick listened, politely. They drank tea. Then Harwick shook his head. "I'm afraid it is not convenient at the moment," he said. The voice was polite. The answer was clear. Frederick left empty-handed. He went home, shut himself in his room, and thought. He had no options. He could not go to anyone else, could not knock on another door, could not tell his family. If his father knew, he would collapse. If his mother knew, she would panic. If Viola knew, Viola. That night, an idea came to him. It was wrong. He knew it even then. But he was desperate, and desperate people sometimes opened the wrong doors. He knew Viola's handwriting. They had grown up in the same house. He had seen her letters, her notes. It was elegant, clean, measured, not difficult to imitate. That night, he sat down and wrote as Viola, a letter addressed to Lord Harwick, written in Viola's voice, short, polite, warm. She introduced herself as Frederick's sister, someone who loved and admired her brother. There were compliments about Harwick's place in society, his reputation. It looked innocent. He sent it. Harwick replied. That surprised him, but it should not have. Harwick was 62, a cold marriage, a dull life, and suddenly a young, refined, warm woman was writing to him. Hard to ignore. The correspondence continued. Frederick wrote carefully. He did not go too far, but he did not pull back either. He thought about how Viola would sound, what she would say, how she would express herself. And it worked. With each letter, Harwick opened up a little more, became a little more human. It went on for weeks. Then Frederick waited for the right moment. In one letter, still in Viola's voice, he wrote, very gently, almost unnoticed, "I have heard that my brother is going through difficult times. It pains me greatly. He would never speak of such things, but I know. He respects you deeply. I only wished you to know." Nothing more. But Harwick understood. 2 weeks later, all of Frederick's debts were gone. Quietly, off the record, without anyone noticing. Frederick's voice trembled as he spoke, but he was not finished. Harwick wanted more. The letters had been enough at first, but now he wanted to meet her, to see Viola, at a ball, at a dinner, somewhere, just to meet. Frederick panicked. He delayed. "She is ill," he said. "She has gone to the country." "Soon," he said. Harwick insisted. With every letter, a little more. And then, Lady Harwick found the letters. Viola had not moved the entire time. She sat across from him, hands folded in her lap, listening. There was nothing on her face. No anger, no tears. She was simply listening. When Frederick finished, there was silence. A long silence. Within it, Viola was putting things together. That moment in the ballroom. Lady Harwick's voice, "What business does a woman have here after writing to my husband?" The way the room had frozen. The way people had stepped back. The stares. Now she understood. She had done nothing, written no letters, known nothing, but all of London blamed her, and the guilty person sat in front of her now, confessing. "What does Harwick want now?" Viola asked. Her voice was flat, flatter than she expected. Frederick did not lift his head. He sent word, "Says I must stay silent, or he will expose all the letters. If the full contents come out." "I understand," Viola said. And she did. If the full contents of those letters came out, it would not only destroy her, it would destroy Frederick, his career, his future, everything. If their father heard, he would collapse. The family would be ruined. Harwick had calculated this perfectly. Viola stood, walked to the window. Outside the street was empty, the sky gray. London continued, as it always did. Something hardened inside her. Frederick had made a terrible mistake. She knew it, and he knew it. That was why he could not meet her eyes. But anger would change nothing now. What was done was done. Harwick held everything, and Viola had nothing. For now. "Do not tell anyone," Viola said. She did not turn, still looking out the window. "Viola, no one." Now she turned. Her voice was calm, but final. "Leave it to me." There was something complex on Frederick's face. Shame, real, deep shame. But beneath it, something else. A small, unpleasant relief. The expression of someone whose burden had just been lifted because someone else had taken it. Viola saw it. She said nothing. That night, she went to her room and closed the door. She did not lie down. She sat and thought. What Harwick had. What he could prove, what she could possibly do. And somewhere in the back of her mind, whether she wanted it or not, the Duke's smile remained. "We are not acquainted, Your Grace. How well do you know Lord Harwick, Miss Pemberton?" What did that man know? The season's closing ball. Hartwell House, one of the largest halls in Mayfair. That morning, when Viola woke, she had decided she would not go. Enough was enough. To step into those rooms again, to feel those looks, to hear those whispers. It was enough. But Frederick had come. He had knocked on her door, entered, sat across from her. His voice was low but insistent. "You have to go, Viola." "Why?" "Harwick will be there. If you don't appear, it will look like you're running, and if you're running, you're guilty. You know that." Viola had looked out the window. The sky was gray, the street empty. "They already think that," she said. "They'll think worse." There had been a long silence. Viola stood up, left the room without saying anything. She went. The hall was full, lights shining, the orchestra playing, everyone looking their best. Everything was as it always was. But when Viola entered, several heads turned, noticeably, deliberately. The whispers began. She heard them. There was no way not to. She left her mother beside a familiar couple, then moved to the side. She stood there, hands clasped in front of her, and waited. She did not quite know what she was waiting for, but she waited. Half an hour passed. No one approached her. Then she saw Harwick. He was walking from across the room, straight, slow, with that quiet confidence, toward her. His eyes were fixed on her, and there was something in his expression, not exactly a threat, but very close to one. A reminder. I am here. You are here. We both know what this is. Viola did not run. If she ran, she would look guilty. So she stayed. Harwick stopped in front of her, too close, slightly beyond what society allowed. His voice was low, no one nearby could hear, but that thin smile was still on his face. "I wonder what they would say if they read all the letters, Miss Pemberton." Something inside Viola tightened, hardened. She met his eyes, and for the first time she saw not the moment, but the man. 62, powerful, holding everything, and she holding nothing. Harwick opened his mouth to continue. "Miss Pemberton." Another voice, deep, calm, but carrying weight in the room. They both turned. James Prestwood was there, Duke of Aldenmore. He was not looking at Harwick, he was looking at Viola. His hand was extended, gloved, steady, certain. "Would you do me the honor of this dance, Miss Pemberton?" The room whispered. Everyone had heard, because the Duke of Crestwood did not dance, not once this season. Mothers had pushed their daughters forward, women had tried to catch his attention, everyone had tried. The result had always been the same. Now his hand was extended to Viola Pemberton. Harwick fell silent. His smile froze, just for a second, but Viola saw it. She looked at the offered hand. For a moment, just a moment, she thought. Then she placed her hand in his. When they stepped onto the dance floor, all eyes were on them. Viola felt it on her back, her shoulders, above her. But she could not think about that now. Her mind was elsewhere. The Duke stepped forward, took her hand. His other hand came to her waist. The orchestra began. They turned. They were silent at first. A few steps passed like that. Viola was not looking at him, her gaze fixed somewhere across the floor. Then the Duke spoke, so quietly she almost did not hear, but she did. "I know Frederick wrote those letters." Viola's step nearly stopped. She did not stop, forced herself forward, but something inside her had gone still. "I know Harwick paid his debts." She said nothing, could not. Something was caught in her throat. The Duke continued, his voice unchanged, calm, low, meant only for her. "And I know who Lady Harwick is to make such a scene." Now Viola looked at him, for the first time that night. Truly looked. She did not know what she expected to see. Curiosity, satisfaction, calculation. But it was none of those. He was simply looking at her. Calm, direct, as if hiding nothing. They turned. The music continued. Then the Duke spoke again. Same voice, same calm. "You are not alone in this, Miss Pemberton." And in that moment, that cold, withdrawn weight she had been carrying for months, that tight, suffocating feeling, shifted, just a little, almost unnoticeable, but she felt it. She looked away, swallowed what was in her throat. They continued dancing in silence. The orchestra played, couples turned, the room whispered. Then Viola spoke. Her voice was flat, very low, almost as if speaking to herself. "Why?" The Duke took another step. They turned. "Because some things are simply too dishonest to ignore." Viola did not ask again. When the dance ended, the Duke led her to the edge of the floor. He bowed slightly, then stepped away. Viola remained. People were still watching, but the look had changed. It had been one thing before. Now it was something else. Society calculates quickly. The Duke of Crestwood had not asked anyone to dance all season. Now he had. Viola Pemberton. Everyone did the math, and everyone reached the same conclusion. If the Duke stood beside her, continuing this matter was no longer wise, because standing against the Duke of Crestwood, that was something no one in London would risk. Many things could be done in that city. That could not. The whispers changed. They did not disappear. Whispers never disappear in society. But their tone shifted. And that was enough. Horwick did not approach Viola again that night. He stood at the far end of the room, drank something, spoke briefly with a few people, then left early, quietly, without a word. Lady Horwick had not come at all. The next morning, the Pemberton house was quiet. Her mother was in the kitchen, her father in his study. Frederick had not yet risen. Viola sat by the window in her room. She looked outside. The street was empty, the morning still cool and gray. The milkman had passed. The smell of bread drifted from the bakery. Somewhere, a door opened and closed. An ordinary morning. Out of habit, Viola checked herself, as she had done every morning for months. Was that tightness still there? That weight? That feeling of no way out? It was not. Not completely. It had not disappeared. That is not how the world works. One dance does not erase everything. People would not forget. They would continue to talk. Some doors would remain closed. Some invitations would never come again. She knew this. But something had changed. That suffocating pressure, that sense of walls closing in, had loosened, just a little. But it was there. And for now, that was enough. Viola kept looking out the window. The street was slowly waking. Footsteps, a distant carriage, the baker opening his door. London continued as it always did, and for the first time that season, breathing felt a little easier. The dance ended. The Duke led Viola to the edge of the floor, bowed slightly, and stepped away. Viola remained. People were still watching. But the look had changed. It had been one thing before. Now it was something else. Society calculates quickly. The Duke of Crestwood had not asked anyone to dance all season. Now he had. Viola Pemberton. Everyone reached the same conclusion. If the Duke stood beside her, pursuing this matter was no longer wise, because opposing the Duke of Crestwood, that was not something anyone would dare. The whispers changed. They remained, they always remain, but their tone shifted, and that was enough. Harwick did not approach Viola again that night. He stayed at the far end of the room, drank, spoke briefly with a few people, and left early, quietly, without saying anything. Lady Harwick had not come at all. The next morning, the Pemberton house was quiet. Her mother was in the kitchen. Her father was in his study. Frederick had not yet risen. Viola sat by the window in her room. She looked outside. The street was empty, the early morning air still cool and gray. The milkman had already passed. The smell of bread drifted from the bakery. Somewhere, a door opened and closed. An ordinary morning. Out of habit, Viola checked herself, as she had done every morning for months. Was that tightness still there? That weight? That feeling of no way out? It wasn't. Not completely. It hadn't disappeared. That is not how the Victorian world works. One dance does not erase everything. People do not forget. Conversations continue. Some doors remain closed. Some invitations never come again. She knew all of this. But something had changed. That suffocating pressure inside her, that sense of walls closing in, had loosened, just a little. But it was there, and for now, that was enough. Viola kept looking out the window. The street was slowly waking, a few footsteps, a distant carriage, the baker opening his door. London continued, as it always did. And for the first time that season, breathing felt a little easier. So what happened next? You were probably wondering, and you were right to wonder, because the story did not end on that night of the dance. It continued. Everyone's life continued. Let me tell you. Lord Harwick collapsed in 1884. This time, Viola had nothing to do with it. This time, it was something much larger. Money, large sums passing into the wrong hands, false signatures, false accounts. The details were long. The outcome was simple. Lord Harwick was forced to withdraw from society. Quietly, but everyone knew why. And as he withdrew, people remembered that first night, the night he cornered Viola Pemberton in the center of the ballroom. Lady Harwick's voice, the frozen room, Viola walking out. But this time, they looked at it differently. Some felt shame, because they had watched, stayed silent. Some had even whispered. In Victorian society, shame is felt quietly. No one speaks of it. No one apologizes. But it is felt. Frederick rebuilt his career. Slowly, patiently, step by step. It was not easy. London is a small place. People may not forget, but over time they begin to focus on other things. Frederick worked, kept his head down, drew no attention. In time, he became a respected man. He had a good career, a good family, a good life. But he never repaid what he owed Viola. It was not a debt of money. That kind of debt cannot be calculated. Viola had risked everything for him. Her name, her place in society, months of isolation, the weight she carried alone. There was no equivalent. They both knew this, and they never spoke of it. Not once. For years, they sat at the same table, met at holidays, wrote letters, but never about that. Some debts remain like that, unspoken, unpaid. Lady Harwick left London in the autumn of 1883. The official reason was health. The London winter did not suit her. Her doctor had recommended Paris. No one believed it, but no one asked either. Because when Lady Harwick left, everyone breathed a little easier. No one said it aloud, but it was felt. News from her life in Paris came rarely. Someone would see her now and then, in a cafe, in a park, at the opera. She looked well, they said. Perhaps she was. Perhaps she wasn't. London no longer cared. As for the story between the Duke of Crestwood and Viola, it unfolded as society expected, but not at the speed anyone expected. No one was in a hurry. Not the Duke, not Viola. After that night, they did not see each other for a while. Then a small encounter in the park, the kind that looks like coincidence. They spoke, short but real. Then an invitation. Another meeting. A dinner. Slowly they learned each other. Viola learned the Duke's silence, when he chose to speak, when he chose not to. What lay behind that distance? The Duke learned Viola, the woman behind the composed exterior, what she thought, what made her laugh, what angered her. They did not ask many questions. They did not explain much. But something built, carefully, patiently. In the spring of 1885, Viola became the Duchess of Aldenmore. The wedding was small, at Viola's request. She did not want a grand ceremony. She had grown tired of such things. It was a simple room, filled with real people, warm. Of course, society talked about that too. The Duke of Crestwood, such a modest wedding? Yes, because the Duke did not care. And now, neither did Viola. And Lady Harwick's letters. Those letters kept for years at the bottom of a drawer, waiting to be burned. One day, the Duke took them out. Shortly before his marriage to Viola, he sat at his desk, opened the envelopes, and read them, not to understand, but to see them one last time. Those long, admiring, love-filled letters, written while she was married to another man. Then he stood, walked to the fireplace, and one by one, he placed them into the fire. He watched. The paper curled, darkened, turned to smoke, and disappeared. All of them. When the last letter was gone, he stood there for a while. He never told Viola, never showed her, because it no longer mattered. Not the letters, not the woman who wrote them, not those nights. They were gone, like smoke. Some things end like that, quietly, in front of a fireplace, when no one is watching. And Viola Pemberton, the woman who stood at the edge of the ballroom that night, in her pale blue dress, alone, uninvited, carrying that suffocating weight. That woman, a few years later, became one of the most respected women in London. Society talked about that too, but this time, they spoke differently. Thanks for staying with the story until the very end. Let us know where you're watching from and how it made you feel, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one.